what is happening in Pakistan today in terms of the crisis of the state, in terms of the political crisis and the polarization and the much talked about divisions within the society.
It is similar to crises Pakistan has faced in the 1950s, in the late 60s, again in the late 70s, and throughout the 1990s. There is a very basic level disagreement about the proper role for different institutions.
I believe that, the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, had kind of asked for it, given its conduct over the last 6-7 years. If you remember how Nawaz Sharif was disqualified, prior to that, how the former Prime Minister Gillani was ousted from his office. They've become a political player of sorts, a political party without being a political party.
Most of the big actors have regularly failed to agree on the basic rules of the game. The judiciary will naturally assume a politicized position. If it does not challenge the government of the day, it will seem to be collaborating with it. And if it opposes the government of the day, it will seem to be siding with the opposition.
Hello and welcome to New Wave Global. And I'm joined by Mr. Ilhan Niaz, who's a historian of Pakistan and an academic at the Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad. Ilhan is an author of many books that have covered Pakistan's history, recent history, as well as the challenges that Pakistani state and its governance have faced in the past and continue to face. And I actually requested Ilhan to join me this afternoon because there are so many things that we need to understand as to what is happening in Pakistan today in terms of the crisis of the state, in terms of the political crisis and the polarization and the much talked about divisions within the society. And I thought we can make sense of it all with Ilhan's help. So thank you, Ilhan, for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I mean, since you have authored many books and have covered different phases of Pakistan's history, what has been happening in the past 1 year? Is it a departure from the previous trends, or is it a continuation of the similar kind of institutional crises and conflicts that we have seen through the course of history?
I think in some respects, it is similar to crises Pakistan has faced in the 1950s, in the late 60s, again in the late 70s, and throughout the 1990s, in which there is a very basic level disagreement about the proper role for different institutions and the overall divergence between the existence of a de facto authority in the form of the civil military bureaucracy and the de jure authority in the form of a parliament or the courts or other such institutions is not very stable. So that kind of crisis Pakistan is no stranger to. What this crisis, of course, is different in some ways is that what we see is that a very large percentage, it's difficult to quantify it, we'll only find out if there is an election, but a substantial percentage of the traditional social support base of the Pakistani military now appears to be enamored with Imran Khan, who was at one stage a protege of the military, but now appears to have become autonomous or grown beyond the original programming that he was launched with. So I think it's a very interesting situation, and that social impact and that social mobilization is putting pressure on all institutions, all leaders. There is a widespread impression that the PDM is running from an election. They are afraid of, whenever the election happens, that they feel that they are likely to lose those elections. So they are looking for various ways to delay that outcome. And the PTI, for its part, is also pursuing an essentially scorched earth strategy when it comes to its approach towards the government, when it comes to its approach towards trying to foment popular discord, when it comes to its dissolution of the assemblies before the, riding out of their 5-year term limit, with the hope that that would perhaps compel the government at the center to then also dissolve itself and go for elections throughout the country. So we're in a right royal mess. It's not something that we've never seen before, but even by our standards, this is pretty bad, what is going on.
Right. So coming back to the institutions, Ilhan, I mean, you have seen that certainly the social base that you talk about, and if you look at it from a class perspective, the wide range of middle classes, as we call them, I mean, they have strong, support for Imran Khan and his both his personal sort of charisma, his personal power and influence, and they all see him as a messiah of sorts, and that particular class also enters the civil service. It also, enters the judiciary, the military, it's also part of the media. It's also part of your universities, and that's why we see lots of support for Mr. Khan on campuses, across Pakistan. And but the peculiar thing here is that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, which is also currently seems to be divided on this issue of how to deal with the cases that concern Mr. Imran Khan. Because the thing is that in the recent, ongoing proceedings on holding elections in the provincial assemblies, we have seen that, one after the other, dissenting judges have been leaving benches, have been passing verdicts which are critical of the Chief Justice. And in a way, it is a clear sort of public display of a house divided. And do you think it is due to this particular factor of the polarized polity, or is it something more, is it something deeper that we need to be looking at?
I think the problem over here is that no constitution actually prescribes a solution for a lack of political wisdom amongst the members of the power elite and the political class. And unfortunately, in Pakistan, far too often, what are essentially questions of policy or questions of politics end up in the docket of this or that layer of the judiciary, precisely because the executive and the legislature and the rest of the state and the informal power brokers are just not able to come to a sensible solution or to a sensible arrangement. So when such problems are brought before the judiciary, they are naturally open to a wide range of interpretation. And regardless of the decision that the judiciary makes, under such circumstances, it will always seem to be partisan to a sizable section of the population. So back in last April, when the Imran Khan government was essentially attempting to subvert the constitution by trying to prevent the vote of no confidence from happening, at that time, the Supreme Court justices wrote a letter. The Supreme Court Chief Justice, he constituted a bench. I remember at that time, there was a lot of people saying that, oh, this bench is maybe too pro-PTI or too pro this or too pro that. There was a lot of such stuff going on. And at the end of the day, it returned a unanimous verdict, essentially restoring the assembly and therefore setting in motion the dismissal of the PTI government. Now, at this point in time, there is an explicit constitutional command that when an assembly is dissolved, the election should be held within 90 days. Mm-hmm. And that is something which has happened in the sense that two of the assemblies have been dissolved, and there is no constitutional requirement for all elections in a federation to be held at the same time. That can be argued is more convenient, but it is not actually something that the Constitution mandates. So you can well have a situation where one part of the country is going to the elections and other parts of the country still have their governments, and the election at a lower tier does not actually affect the composition of the higher tier until such time as the higher tier completes its term. So in that respect, it is quite obvious that the ruling coalition is reluctant to call those elections. And that is the root of the current, constitutional crisis we seem to be headed towards. Because again, the Supreme Court can say that this is in line with the Constitution, but then what exactly can it do if somebody defies the order of the court? And here what we see is that both in the case of Imran Khan and his various, I would say aggressive tactics vis-a-vis the courts and vis-a-vis the cases against him, what we see is that the judiciary does not seem to have an executive that is capable of enforcing its writ. So that creates a whole new problem for the judiciary, that should the judiciary pass orders, if those orders are not likely to be enforced for one reason or another. So in one case, the opposition leader is too popular, he's got too many people riled up, it's not physically possible to bring him to court or to arrest him. He claims that he is under threat as well, and he has had an assassination attempt against him as well. So the point is that who exactly is then going to enforce the will of the court, assuming that it can make its will known? The divisions within the court, I think at this particular juncture are very damaging, because if the judiciary is seen to be divided not on questions of, let's say, legal interpretation, which is fairly okay. I mean, every judge has a right to their view about the law, but this seems to be something that has assumed a far more openly partisan dimension, with people openly accusing some judges of being pro the PDM and other judges of being pro the PTI. So this is actually very damaging for the reputation of the judiciary.
But yeah, exactly. That's that, as an institution that is also in the popular parlance called the apex court, where all appeals go, where all big issues of law, constitution, national policy are settled. I mean, that's whether they are mandated or not. But do you think, Ilhan, there's another view? And that's I believe that, the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, had kind of asked for it, given its conduct over the last 6-7 years, the way it has been sort of a part of the political engineering efforts in the country. If you remember how Nawaz Sharif was disqualified, prior to that, how the former Prime Minister Gillani was ousted from his office, and then all the subsequent political developments. I mean, they've become a political player of sorts, a political party without being a political party. I mean, do you think am I being too critical, or is there some merit in the fact that the current and the incoming Chief Justice ought to review the role of the court in such matters? I mean, how far should the Supreme Court be meddling in political issues? I mean, you saw Justice Mansoor Ali Shah's judgment, the dissenting judgment from the previous bench, in which he very clearly lays out that litigation is no substitute for political consultation and negotiation, essential part of a parliamentary democracy.
I think that in our context, where most of the big actors have regularly failed to agree on the basic rules of the game, the judiciary will naturally assume a politicized position. If it does not challenge the government of the day, it will seem to be collaborating with it. And if it opposes the government of the day, it will seem to be siding with the opposition. So in that respect, the judiciary in Pakistan, essentially since 1953-54, has always had a political role to play, either as the legitimizing agent of an executive that is, going off the rails, or after 2005, as this kind of sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of successive governments, that if you don't do certain things or don't behave in a particular way, then the judiciary can exercise various constitutional authority in order to dismiss even prime ministers if the need arises, in its opinion. So removing that is something which the legislators can do. So for instance, when it comes to Article 62, 63, when the 18th Amendment was being passed and so many other changes were taking place, that was a great time for the legislators to do away with what is clearly a very ambiguous provision. I mean, that is a provision that would arguably lend itself to a highly personalized opinion in the view of any particular judge who happens to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at a particular time. But they didn't do that. And in a similar manner, what we see is throughout our history that there is an attempt by political leaders to basically use oppressive legislation or ambiguous legislation in order to punish their political opponents. And they don't seem to realize that tomorrow these same laws, these same arbitrary measures can be applied against you as well when you are sitting in the opposition. So we have this, very funny in many ways alteration that everybody condemns while in opposition what they were doing in government, and then they switch places. So in that sort of a situation, the judiciary will play a political role. But that in itself, I would argue, is not strictly speaking unconstitutional. So if we look at other judicial systems that have a tradition of judicial review, it is understood that the judiciary will have a legitimate right to intervene if the constitutional machinery or the constitutional process of the state is imperiled. And arguably today, we have reached or nearly reached that point where we can say that a situation is likely to arise once the 90-day limit is crossed, if it is indeed crossed, that a very, very fundamental constitutional question will arise. Can the caretaker governments continue beyond the term of 90 days? Can elections that are held after 90 days in violation of the explicit command of the Constitution be considered legitimate? So, we are headed towards a situation where, I would definitely not want to be a senior judge in Pakistan right now, because again, these are questions to which essentially no matter what you say, you are going to be adding fuel to what is already a situation that is on fire.
Right. That's a very insightful response. Ilhan, so where do you think, we have talked about the judiciary, the split therein, the society, the political forces. Where do you think Pakistan's ultimate power broker, the military establishment, the senior commanders or the institution, where do you see them in this current crisis? Because we were told last year by the outgoing chief of the army staff that the military had a political role, and now they had decided to become neutral, quote unquote, take a back seat. And thus far, the indications are also there, because the new army chief who was appointed in November has not really made that kind of public statements or met journalists or, made any pronouncements on what his doctrine, quote unquote, is. So do you think that the military still is the final arbiter in this crisis, as we saw in 90s when General Kakar intervened between the president and the then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, or later other army chiefs were settling the issues, using their stick and saying, behave everyone, otherwise we'll fix you. Is that, do you think that is the military will do that again, or is it, or has it been weakened like the judiciary through the recent political crises?
I think during the 1990s, thanks to General Zia's tampering with the constitution, Article 58(2)(b allowed the military's influence in the political system to be channelized through an outwardly constitutional mechanism, the president dissolving the government. And when that power was stripped away by the second Nawaz Sharif government, within a very short period of time, the military took over directly. So in that respect, we are in a situation where there is actually no constitutional mechanism through which the military can intervene to remove a government. So that only leaves the alternative, which is some kind of a military takeover. But under the present social circumstances and political circumstances, it does not seem as if such an outcome is at all likely, or that the military would have any appetite for actually taking over formally the reins of government, because that creates its own sets of risks for the military leadership when it, moves from the de facto to the de facto and the de jure at the same time. And that is not a risk which at least I think the military is prepared to take.
Right.
Other people are talking about some kind of an emergency rule or some sort of an extended caretaker setup. And, there's a lot of speculation on all of these fronts that, how might such an arrangement work, or what would be the way in which it could be cobbled together. But all of these arrangements, when you think about the enormity of the problems Pakistan is facing in terms of its economy, in terms of its social situation, you really need a government with some kind of a mandate that can go and take decisions. And that does not seem to be something that we will be able to get except through the holding of an election. So the longer we delay holding that election, the worse our political predicament is likely to get. Whether it gets so bad at some point that people start, as they used to in the late 90s or in other periods in our history, start, praying for the man on horseback to come and save them, that remains to be seen. But I think that under the current circumstances, as I indicated earlier, a lot of the military's traditional social support base is very much in the camp of the PTI. So it's not clear that a military regime would be able to draw upon the loyalty and the support of that 30-40% of the population that is directly or indirectly tied into the military and its interests.
Right. That's a very interesting sort of observation. And in the case that they got, also, I think because of the harsh sort of political, I would not call it feedback, harsh political attacks that the two army chiefs have seen. I mean, Imran Khan has been lambasting General Bajwa, the former army chief, almost every day. And even the present one has been targeted by the PTI. Earlier, Nawaz Sharif attacked General Bajwa and his DGISI, General Faiz. So I think given these kind of attacks, also the military would not want to be overtly seen as playing a political role. I mean, that's my hunch too. But ultimately, who would settle this matter then? If Supreme Court verdicts are not going to be implemented, which is sadly seems to be the case. I mean, even if they order a fresh election next week, I'm not sure if the current government would obey those orders. I mean, what happens then? Would there be a breakdown?
I think if the
Sorry for this
no,
speculative
no,
question.
no, I think that in the event that the government fails to hold elections or otherwise satisfy the court that it will do so, but maybe take just a couple more weeks than the 90-day limit, then we are headed towards a full-blown constitutional crisis. And I really don't see this government or any government being able to recover from the effects of that crisis for a very long period of time. So right now, it seems as if the PDM is exercising a kind of a Samson option that, okay, if we're not going to be in a position to win the next elections, we'll create such a constitutional nightmare that it won't really matter if the elections are held or under what circumstances they are held. They'll simply be too controversial, too compromised, too problematic for anyone to take them seriously. But the problem, of course, with this approach is that it is likely to plunge Pakistan into a period of prolonged instability. And this is something which, interestingly enough, Pakistan has not really experienced, in the sense that whenever there has been this type of a breakdown, the military has stepped in or has been able to intervene somehow. But if that does not materialize, you could very well end up with a situation where you have rival political parties claiming the right to rule rival provinces. I mean, this is a nightmare scenario. But if we don't get our act together and set in motion the constitutional process for making the next government, then it's going to be a free-for-all. And that is something which, again, is not in the interests of the 220 million people of this country, or indeed the wider region or the world. So if Pakistan has friends anywhere, they should basically just tell the government that, please follow your own constitution.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Ilhan, I mean, that is my worry as well. I mean, this long-term political crises or instability, sometimes it becomes really debilitating for countries and nations. But I think we shall continue and pick some of these themes about constitutionalism, about these frequent institutional breakdowns and how to fix them in the long term. And also, I really want to talk about your new book about the future of our planet and the threats such as climate change, how they pose a great danger to humanity as a whole. I mean, I think we shall pick up on some of these themes in the coming weeks, and I really hope you can keep on joining us. And with that, I will thank you and
Thank you.
the viewers. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.